Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. The Senate has officially accepted the articles of impeachment, setting up the trial over President Trump's removal to begin next week. Overseeing the trial is Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. He and 99 senators were sworn in at the Capitol today. The 100th senator, Oklahoma Republican Jim Inhofe, is back home dealing with a family medical issue. Senators will be hearing evidence and ruling on 2 articles of impeachment. They are abuse of power in the Trump administration's dealings with Ukraine and obstruction of Congress. President Trump says he wants a short trial.
Well, I think it should go very quickly. It's a hoax. It's a hoax. Everybody knows that. It's a complete hoax. The whole thing with Ukraine, everything was false. You have now the Ukrainian president and the foreign minister of Ukraine saying there was nothing done wrong. In fact, they said there was absolutely no pressure whatsoever. Everything was perfect, and they impeach.
Earlier today, House Intelligence Chair and lead impeachment manager Adam Schiff read the articles to senators. Here's a portion of that.
President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States.
This all comes as new evidence is being released related to the actions of President Trump's allies in Ukraine. The House Intelligence Committee released newly obtained documents from Lev Parnas. He's an ex-associate of the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. They detail apparent spying on the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. During interviews, Parnas implicated several top Trump administration officials, including the president and the vice president. He said they all had knowledge about efforts to force Ukraine into investigating Joe Biden.
President Trump knew exactly what was going on. He was aware of all of my movements. I wouldn't do anything without the consent of Rudy Giuliani or the president.
Jan Crawford, Paula Reid, and Jennifer Haberkorn join me now. Jan is CBS News chief legal correspondent. Paula is a CBS News White House correspondent. Jennifer is a congressional reporter for the Los Angeles Times. Welcome to all of you. Jan, walk us through, first of all, the role that Chief Justice Roberts will play in the Senate trial next week.
I mean, it's very different than what he's used to over at the Supreme Court across the street, where he's in the center seat, totally in control of that courtroom and the bench, running the arguments. Here, it's more of a ceremonial role in a way, a much more modest, limited role. The Senate sets the rules in this trial, and if he makes a ruling, the Senate has the power to overturn it. So he's going to be working very closely with the Senate parliamentarian to try to implement the rules of the Senate, guided by what he believes those are. I don't think he's going to shy away from a ruling just because he thinks that the Senate might then overturn him, which of course it has the power to do in this unique kind of trial. But it's a limited role, and it presents a unique challenge for him to show that he's above this partisan fray, not beholden to either side, and really present the face of the Supreme Court to the American people.
So you touched on it there. I mean, it sounds like a very big difference here between the role that Roberts plays and that of a judge in a typical trial.
Absolutely, and it's unique because this proceeding is unique in the Constitution. It's a mixed proceeding of law and politics, where the Senate sits not only as the jurors, but they're also the judge in a way. They're also the court. They set the rules. They can overturn whatever the Chief Justice says. That doesn't happen, of course, in a normal trial with a judge in the Supreme Court. So this will be, like I said, a challenge for him, but it's also an opportunity to show, as he has long insisted, that courts are above politics, that he is neutral, that he's above the fray. He's going to see that as an opportunity. And of course, this also comes at a time when the Supreme Court across the street is in the middle of the most contentious term that it's had in my memory. I mean, they've got every issue, a hot button issue, from gay rights, gun rights, religious freedom, even President Trump tax returns and whether he has to turn those over. There's an abortion case. All of those issues the court is now grappling with that are going to come out, inject the court really into the presidential campaign. So that presents another challenge for Roberts to show that he's neutral, that he's above politics during this contentious term. The way the trial is set up, he will not miss any of the action in his day job. The trial's not going to start until the afternoon. He'll still be able to preside over arguments at the Supreme Court, participate in their private conferences, and then he's going to have to cross the street for the trial that could last, who knows, I mean, weeks.
Very much an open question at this point. Jan Crawford for us. Jan, thank you. Paula Reid, turning back to Lev Parnas, what are the implications of this new information that we laid out at the top?
Well, what Lev Parnas said last night and throughout his media blitz this week really undermines the White House's defense. Lev Parnas is a Soviet-born businessman. He was working closely with the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, on these various efforts in Ukraine. He is at the center of this impeachment inquiry. But last night, he said that all of their efforts were about getting the president reelected. It was all about 2020. It had nothing to do with U.S. interests. And he said that the president was aware of all of this. Now, the White House has previously claimed that all of these efforts were done in an effort to root out corruption in Ukraine. So what Lev Parnas is saying, again, it undermines the message that has been coming out of the White House.
And Paula, how are President Trump, Vice President Pence, and the other members of the administration responding to Parnas's accusations?
Well, they're using what is affectionately referred to on the internet as the Mariah Carey defense. As many of you know, every time she is asked about Jennifer Lopez, it's a famous meme. She just shakes her head and says, "I don't know her." That's exactly what the president and the vice president are doing here. They're both shaking their head and saying, Lev Parnas, I don't know him. Now, earlier today in the Oval Office, the president expanded on this. He said, look, if there are pictures of us, I take pictures with lots of people. I go to all kinds of events. I meet people, but I don't know him. The problem with this, Elaine, is that there are several people suggesting that, in fact, the president did know Lev Parnas. And historically, the president has insisted he didn't know people. And then it turns out he knew them very well. In fact, very close to Lev Parnas, Marie Yovanovitch, the former U.S. ambassador. At first, when the stories about her started breaking in this effort to push her out of office, the president told us reporters here at the White House, he said, yeah, I don't really know her, but I've heard some bad things about her. And of course, as more and more information came out in the impeachment hearings, it turned out that was not accurate. So it will be interesting to see if the defense that has been offered by the vice president and the president today, if that actually holds up.
Well, Jennifer, what has the reaction to this news been from Republicans and Democrats in the Senate?
Democrats really want to hear from Mr. Parnas now. He's probably shot toward the top of the list of witnesses that they would like to call in an impeachment trial. Republicans are downplaying things. They're noting that Mr. Parnas is under indictment, and in fact, his lawyer is, subtly hinting that he wants immunity in exchange for his testimony. So they're trying to downplay anything that he has to say and anything that could further implicate the president here. And I think we're going to see this debate really rise to the surface in the next couple weeks when the Senate has to contend with the issue of whether they call witnesses in this impeachment trial at all.
And Paula, we're hearing the president's defenders say Parnas is an unreliable witness. You're a former lawyer. Is it common to hear testimony from a witness who is under indictment?
Look, there are serious questions about Lev Parnas' credibility. He has been charged by the Justice Department for possible election fraud. And today, some White House officials have gone out and suggested that he's talking because he's trying to get a plea deal. But Elaine, if you want a plea deal, you take the evidence that you have and you go talk to the U.S. attorney. You don't go talk to Anderson Cooper. So that does not appear to truly be his motivation here for coming out and talking to all of these various press outlets, clearly having turned on the president and his former colleague, Rudy Giuliani.
Well, Jennifer, should we expect Parnas to be called to testify in this trial?
It's a huge open question right now. Like I said, witnesses are going to be a really significant point of contention. They already are. We're going to see some of that play out next week and some of it at the end of the arguments that are already scheduled to take place. Democrats want witnesses called. They want the Senate to issue subpoenas, and Republicans really don't. So whatever Parnas has to say, that's going to be a big part of this upcoming debate over whether witnesses are going to be subpoenaed.
Well, Jennifer, who else do Democrats want to hear testimony from?
They really want to hear from the White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. They also want to hear from John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor. And all of these folks are going to be part of the discussion because so far the White House has refused to hand over these folks, whether it's a deposition or even documents in the form of a subpoena.
And Paula, who do the White House and Republicans want to hear testify?
Well, the White House doesn't want to hear anyone testify. And even though GOP leaders have actually left open the possibility of witnesses, leaving that decision for later in the process, the president's attorneys have been clear they do not want to call witnesses. Yesterday, 2 senior administration officials came out and said, look, even if the president has called for witnesses, potentially like Hunter Biden or the whistleblower himself, they have no interest in hearing from witnesses. Their argument is that it was up to the House to call witnesses and to gather evidence, and the Senate's job is only to assess the case they have been handled. Now, I've also talked to senior advisors to the president who say they don't see any reason to call witnesses. And they have designed this process in such a way, and they have pushed off the decision about witnesses so that the president will have a chance to see the process. And their hope is that once he sees these presentations, he will believe and he will think that he got a fair shake in the Senate and that this is very different than what happened in the House, and that perhaps he will see the wisdom of not turning it into a circus and calling witnesses. That is the hope here. But his team, the folks closest to him who are advising him, they absolutely do not want to call witnesses.
Well, Jennifer, I want to ask about Maine Republican Susan Collins. She questioned why House Democrats only released the Parnas documents now. The White House told CBS News that Collins would potentially vote to call witnesses. Does her skepticism signal a potential change here?
It could. I mean, Collins is going to be one of the most sought after Republicans here because she has been open to witnesses. She is viewed by Democrats as perhaps one of the most likely senators to vote with them to require those witnesses. But you're right, she's skeptical of this Parnas information. Democrats say that they released it recently because they only got the information recently. It's unclear whether that answer is going to really fly with Collins. She really does seem to view this as something that was pulled out at the last minute, right when a trial was about to get underway.
Well, Paula, today the Government Accountability Office released a statement saying President Trump broke the law by withholding military aid money meant for Ukraine. How significant is this?
Once again, here we have more evidence coming out today that undermines the White House's defense during this Senate trial. And in this report, this is a nonpartisan congressional watchdog, and they concluded that the White House Budget Office violated the law when it froze that U.S. military aid to Ukraine. In fact, the report specifically states the law does not permit the president to substitute his own policy priorities for those Congress has enacted. And of course, senior White House officials have testified that last year the president ordered a hold on that critical security assistance, and that order coincided with this ongoing effort to pressure Ukraine to investigate his political rivals. Now, today, Elaine, the White House is defending itself against this report, pointing out that, in fact, Ukraine got its money, and they continue to insist that the president did nothing wrong. But with the Lev Parnas revelations and this report, it increases the pressure on many senators to perhaps not cut this process short and perhaps do some more evidence gathering.
Well, Jennifer, looking ahead to next week, what should we expect to see as the Senate phase of impeachment begins?
It's really going to start with a bang on Tuesday. That's when the Senate has to decide what are the rules surrounding this trial. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, says that all of his Republicans have agreed to put off this question of witnesses until after both sides can make their presentation. Republicans are hoping that by putting off the decision, they can present a fair trial to the public and come to some kind of resolution, preferably one that ends with an acquittal for the president. Democrats argue that that's not a fair trial, that you need to have witnesses and documents in order for that to be fair. Democrats are going to, when Republicans put up this measure, Democrats are going to force a bunch of votes on witnesses. We're going to see perhaps amendments to individually call each witness that they're eyeing, such as Mr. Parnas, Mick Mulvaney, the White House Chief of Staff, John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor. That's probably going to be a very contentious couple hours. It's unclear how long Democrats are going to keep that up, but it's going to be quite contentious. Once that's sorted out, it's probably going to end with Republicans getting their way, and then the arguments will get underway, and senators will have to remain quiet as they listen to the presentations from both the president's lawyers and House Democrats acting essentially as prosecutors here.
All right, Paula Reid and Jennifer Haberkorn, thank you both very much.